Get this garbage out of my war room, sweetheart, before I have you thrown out. General James Whitmore's voice cracked like a rifle shot as he ripped the classified folder off the table and hurled it at Lieutenant Olivia Hayes's chest. He was on his feet now, 61 years old, and shaking with rage, jabbing a thick finger an inch from her face. You think a scared little analyst gets to stop my operation? I've buried better soldiers than you'll ever be. The folder struck her and dropped to the floor. Nobody moved to pick it up. Olivia didn't flinch. She looked down at the file, then back at him, and said 6 quiet words that drained the blood from his face. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something. If you believe that respect should be earned by what a person can do and not by the rank on their shoulder, then take 1 second and subscribe to this channel, because that's the kind of story we tell here. Follow along all the way to the end, because the ending of this one is going to stay with you. And do me a favor. Leave a comment and tell me what city you're watching from right now, because I love seeing how far these stories travel. All right, let's begin. The conference room on the 3rd floor of the command building at Fort Liberty was the kind of room where careers were made and buried. It had a long, polished table, a wall of screens, and a temperature that always ran a few degrees too cold, as if the building itself wanted everyone inside to stay sharp and uncomfortable. On that particular morning, 11 people sat around that table. 10 of them had ribbons and stars and years. 1 of them did not. Lieutenant Olivia Hayes was 31 years old, and she was the youngest person in the room by more than a decade. She had walked in 5 minutes early, taken the seat closest to the door, and said good morning to exactly 2 people, both of whom had barely looked up. She was used to that. In a room full of men who measured a person by how much gray was in their hair and how many combat commands were on their record, a female intelligence analyst with a quiet voice was furniture. She knew it. She had made peace with it a long time ago. At the head of the table sat General James Whitmore. He was 61 broad through the shoulders, even now with a jaw that looked like it had been carved out of the same granite they built monuments from. He had spent 34 years in the Army. He had led men in 3 different theaters. He had buried friends and pinned medals on widows, and he had earned every inch of the authority he carried. That was the problem with a man like Whitmore. He had earned so much that he had stopped believing anyone could ever teach him anything again. The briefing that morning was about Operation Iron Shield. It was a major extraction mission scheduled to move within 72 hours, designed to pull a stranded reconnaissance team out of hostile territory overseas before the window closed, and those men were lost for good. Everyone in the room understood the stakes. Somewhere on the other side of the world, real soldiers were waiting, hiding, counting the hours, praying that the people in this cold, quiet room would not make a mistake. Whitmore ran the briefing the way he ran everything, with total confidence. He walked them through the corridor the team would use for extraction. He pointed at the map. He described the timing, the air support, the fallback positions. When he was finished, he set down the laser pointer and looked around the table. "Any questions?" he said, and it wasn't really a question. It was a period at the end of a sentence. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Olivia raised her hand. Whitmore's eyes went to her, and something flickered across his face that wasn't quite annoyance yet. It was closer to surprise, the way a man is surprised when a piece of furniture speaks. "Lieutenant," he said. "Sir," Olivia said, and her voice was steady, low, careful. "I've been reviewing the satellite feeds from the extraction quarter for the last 6 days. There's a pattern in the enemy movement that concerns me. I don't think that corridor is safe." The room shifted. Not much. Just a small collective tightening, the sound of 11 people all realizing at once that the junior officer had just contradicted a general in front of his peers. Whitmore blinked. "You don't think it's safe?" "No, sir, I don't." "And you came to this conclusion," Whitmore said slowly, "based on satellite feeds." "Based on the pattern in the satellite feeds, sir. There's been a consistent buildup along the eastern ridge over 3 consecutive nights. It doesn't match a random patrol rotation. It matches a corridor being prepared." A colonel to Whitmore's right, a man named Briggs with a face like a clenched fist, let out a short laugh through his nose. "Prepared," he repeated. "You think somebody's setting a trap on the exact route we picked yesterday morning?" "I think it's possible, sir." "You think it's possible," Briggs said, and he looked around the table, inviting the others to enjoy the joke with him. "How would anybody outside this room even know which route we picked, Lieutenant?" And there it was, the question that would matter more than anyone at that table understood yet. Olivia felt it land somewhere deep in her chest, a small cold weight, because she had asked herself that exact same question at 2 o'clock that morning, staring at her monitor, and she had not liked any of the answers. But she didn't say that. Not yet. Instead, she said, "That's part of what concerns me, sir." Whitmore had heard enough. He put both hands flat on the table and leaned forward. "Let me explain something to you, Lieutenant, because I get the feeling nobody has. I have been doing this for 34 years. I have run more extractions than you have birthdays. And in all that time, I have learned that the difference between a good officer and a dangerous one is knowing the limit of what you actually understand." He let that sit. "You are an analyst. You read screens. You look at little dots moving on a map, and you build stories about what they mean. And sometimes those stories are useful, and I appreciate that. But there is a canyon of difference between reading a battlefield and commanding one. And you have never once stood on the second side of that canyon." Somebody chuckled again. Olivia's jaw stayed still. "With respect, sir," she said, "I'm not asking you to trust my command experience. I'm asking you to look at the data." "The data," Whitmore said, and now the contempt was fully out in the open, "says exactly what you have decided it says. That's how it always works with analysts. You find the pattern you're already looking for." He shook his head. "Young officers today, you all think confidence is the same thing as competence. You think because you can talk fast and point at a screen, you've earned the right to override people who have bled for this country. Let me tell you something. Respect is not given because you demand it. Respect is earned, and you have not earned the right to stop this operation." The words hung in the cold air. And this is the part that a lot of people never understand about a woman like Olivia Hayes. She did not get angry. She did not raise her voice. She did not do the thing that everyone in that room half expected her to do, which was to fold up, apologize, and disappear back into her chair. Because Olivia had learned something a long time ago, in a place none of these men knew about in a 48 hours that had rewritten who she was. She had learned that when the truth is on your side, you don't have to shout. You just have to be willing to stay in the room. So she stayed in the room. "I understand, sir," she said quietly. Whitmore nodded, satisfied, and started to reach for his papers to close the briefing. And then Olivia said, "But I'd still like you to look at this before you finalize the corridor." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. It was a plain manila folder sealed with a strip of red tape across the flap, and in the top corner it carried a classification marking that made the colonel next to Whitmore stop mid-breath, because it was not the kind of marking a lieutenant's paperwork usually carried. It was several levels above what anyone in that room, except possibly Whitmore himself, was even cleared to open casually. Olivia slid it across the polished table. It came to rest directly in front of the general. "What is this?" Whitmore said. "It's a corridor analysis, sir, independent of the operation planning. I pulled the raw satellite data. I ran it against the enemy movement history for that region, going back 4 months, and I compared it against a similar movement pattern from a mission that took place before. The comparison is in there." She paused. "I think you'll recognize the earlier mission." Something changed in the room then. It was subtle, but the men who had been chuckling stopped chuckling, because there is a particular kind of quiet confidence that makes even powerful people nervous, and Olivia had just walked all the way into it without raising her voice once. Whitmore looked at the folder. He looked at her, and for a moment he seemed to weigh whether opening it would make him look like a man who took a lieutenant seriously, or whether refusing to open it would make him look like a man who was afraid of what was inside. Pride made the decision for him. "Fine," he said. "Let's see what the analyst found." He tore the red tape, flipped open the flap, and pulled out the first page. He read it, and the smile that had been sitting on his face for the entire briefing slowly went away. Nobody at that table would ever quite be able to describe what happened to General Whitmore's expression in the next 30 seconds. It wasn't fear exactly. It was something worse for a man like him. It was the look of a person who has just been handed proof that the thing he was 100% certain about might be 100% wrong. He turned to the second page, then the third. His thumb moved slower with each one. "Where did you get this comparison mission?" he said, and for the first time all morning his voice had lost its thunder. "It's classified, sir, but it's real. And the movement pattern from that mission is almost identical to what I'm seeing on the Eastern Ridge right now." Colonel Briggs leaned over to look. Whitmore didn't stop him. Briggs read a few lines and his fist of a face went slack. General, Briggs said quietly, this pattern, if this is accurate. I know what it is, Colonel Whitmore said, and he set the pages down very carefully, the way a man sets down something he has just realized might be live. The room had gone completely silent. The temperature felt colder than ever, and Olivia, standing there at the end of the table, felt none of the triumph you might expect. There was no satisfaction in watching a general's confidence crack, because she understood something the rest of them were only beginning to grasp. If she was right, and it was starting to look like she was, then it meant something far more disturbing than a bad route. It meant somebody had already known. It meant the trap was not a coincidence. It meant that somewhere, someone with access to this operation had decided that those stranded soldiers should die. But she was getting ahead of herself. Right now, all that mattered was the room in front of her. Sit down, Lieutenant, Whitmore said. Olivia sat. Whitmore rubbed his hand across his mouth, a gesture Olivia would come to recognize as the thing he did when the ground moved under him. He looked at the folder for a long moment. Then he looked back up at her, and this time there was no contempt in his eyes at all. There was calculation. And underneath the calculation, though, he would never admit it, there was the very beginning of respect. Walk me through it, he said, from the start, slowly. And Lieutenant, if you're wrong about this, it's going to be a very long year for you. And if I'm right, sir, Olivia said, it's going to be a very long war for somebody. Nobody laughed at that. She stood back up because she always thought better on her feet, and she walked them through it. She pulled up the satellite feeds on the wall screen. She showed them the eastern ridge on night 1, a scattering of movement that looked like nothing ordinary forgettable. Then night 2, the scattering pulling into a shape. Then night 3, the shape settling into a formation that no random patrol would ever hold for 3 nights running. She pointed at supply markers, at the way vehicles were being staged just out of the obvious sight lines. She showed them how the planned extraction corridor threaded directly through the center of that formation, the way a rabbit runs through the abrex spot where the snare is waiting. This isn't a patrol, she said. This is a kill box, and our corridor runs right through the middle of it. Colonel Briggs, who 20 minutes ago had laughed at her, was now leaning so far forward, his tie was touching the table. How long have they been building this? He said. 3 nights, sir, which means they've known our approach corridor for at least 3 nights. And that was the sentence that changed everything, because Whitmore had picked that corridor yesterday morning, in that room, with those 11 people. And Olivia was telling him that the enemy had been preparing for it 3 nights before he'd even chosen it. The general went very still. That's not possible, he said slowly. We finalized the corridor yesterday. Yes, sir, Olivia said. That's the problem. You could have heard a pin hit the carpet. Every officer at that table did the same math at the same moment, and none of them liked where it landed. If the enemy had been preparing a trap for 3 nights along a route the command had only chosen yesterday, then one of 2 things was true. Either it was the most extraordinary coincidence in the history of modern warfare, or somebody had told them where to build it before the decision was even made. You're suggesting, Whitmore said, choosing every word like a man walking across ice, that the route was compromised before we selected it. I'm suggesting that the route may have been steered, sir, Olivia said, that we may have been guided toward this corridor by someone who wanted us to pick it. Briggs shook his head hard. That's a hell of an accusation, Lieutenant. You're talking about someone inside the planning, someone in this building. I'm talking about the data, Colonel, Olivia said, echoing back the very thing she'd said at the start when they were still laughing at her. I'm not accusing a person. I don't have a person. I have a pattern, and the pattern says the enemy knew where we'd be before we knew where we'd be. Whitmore stood up. When a man that size stands up in a small, cold room, the whole space seems to shrink around him. He walked to the window and stood with his back to the table, and for a long moment, he said nothing at all. Olivia watched his shoulders. She had learned to read men's shoulders better than their faces because faces lie and shoulders don't. And what she saw in Whitmore's shoulders was a man wrestling with the hardest thing a proud man can be asked to do, which is to consider that he had been about to send his soldiers to die and that he had almost laughed a warning out of the room to do it. When he turned back around, he was a different commander than the one who had opened the meeting. Iron Shield is on hold, he said. Briggs sat up. Sir, the window. The window can wait 48 hours. Those men have hidden for 6 days. They can hide for 2 more. Whitmore's jaw tightened. What I am not going to do is send an extraction team into a kill box because I was too proud to read a folder. He looked at Olivia and something passed between them that neither of them named. Lieutenant Hayes, you're going to keep working this. Quietly. You report to me and only me. Not Briggs, no offense, Colonel. Not the staff. Me. He leaned on the table. Because if you're right and somebody in my command steered this operation toward a slaughter, then I don't know who I can trust in this building anymore. And neither do you. Understood, sir, Olivia said. How long have you known? Whitmore asked. It was a strange question, and he seemed almost embarrassed to ask it. About the corridor. How long? Since 2 o'clock this morning, sir. And you came in here and let me talk for 40 minutes and laugh in your face before you put that folder down. Yes, sir. Why, Olivia thought about that, and when she answered, she gave him the truest thing she had because she had decided a long time ago that she was done softening the truth for men who outranked her. Because if I'd led with the folder, sir, you'd have said I was showing off. You'd have said I was a junior officer trying to embarrass a general. So I let you say everything you were going to say first. I let you get it all out. And then I put down the one thing you couldn't argue with. She held his gaze. It's not about respect, sir. You were right about that this morning. I haven't earned your respect. But the data doesn't need your respect. The data just needs you to look at it. For a long moment, General James Whitmore looked at the 31-year-old lieutenant he had called sweetheart an hour ago. Look at the evidence, he said slowly, almost to himself, before you look at the person presenting it. Yes, sir, that's all I've ever asked. Whitmore nodded. And then, because he was still who he was, he added, Don't get comfortable, Lieutenant. Being right once doesn't make you right twice. You've bought yourself 48 hours and my attention. Now use them. The meeting broke up after that in the strange, awkward shuffle of men who had watched something happen that they didn't have a category for. A few of them nodded at Olivia on the way out. A few of them very deliberately did not. Colonel Briggs stopped by her chair, looked like he wanted to say something, decided against it, and left with his fist of a face turned somewhere else. And Olivia sat alone in the cold room for a moment after they were gone, staring at the folder she had spent 6 years refusing to open in front of anyone. Not this folder. This one was just corridor analysis. She had built it in a single desperate night. No, the folder she was thinking about was a different one, a heavier one, the one she kept locked in a drawer. She never opened the one that carried her real name and her real record and the 48 hours that had made her who she was. She had promised herself she would never use it. She believed all the way down that a soldier should be judged by what they can do now, not by what they did once when nobody was allowed to talk about it. But sitting in that cold room with a trap forming on the other side of the world and a traitor forming somewhere much closer, she felt for the first time in 6 years that the promise might not be one she could keep. She gathered her things and walked out. Waiting for her in the hallway, leaning against the wall with 2 cups of coffee and an expression that said she already knew exactly how the meeting had gone, was the one person at Fort Liberty that Olivia actually trusted, Sergeant Maya Collins. Maya was 38, sharp as a blade, and had worked intelligence alongside Olivia for 2 years. She had the rare gift of being able to tell you that you were about to walk off a cliff without ever once making you feel small about it. He laughed at you, didn't he? Maya said, holding out one of the coffees, for about 40 minutes. And then Olivia took the coffee, and then he stopped laughing. Maya's eyebrows went up a fraction of an inch, which for Maya was the equivalent of another person falling out of their chair. You showed him the corridor analysis. I showed him the corridor analysis. And he put Iron Shield on hold. It wasn't a question. Maya could read a hallway the way Olivia could read a satellite feed, and Olivia's face was telling her the whole story. 48 hours. They started walking 2 women moving through a building full of men who had spent the morning deciding they didn't matter. And Maya, keeping her voice low, said the thing that had been sitting in the back of both their minds since 2 o'clock that morning. Liv, if that corridor was compromised before the command picked it, I know, then somebody in this building fed it out. Somebody who was in the planning. I know, Maya. That's not a mistake. That's not bad luck. That's a person. That's a name. Maya stopped walking and Olivia stopped with her. You understand what you just started in there, right? You didn't just save an extraction team. You just told a 2-star general that there's a traitor in his own command. And whoever that traitor is, they just found out this morning that a lieutenant nobody respects is the one thing standing between them and a very profitable little massacre. Olivia looked down at her coffee. She thought about the buildup on the eastern ridge, the vehicle staged just out of sight, the patient professional care with which somebody had built a snare around men who were only trying to come home. And she thought about the fact that whoever had done it from inside a building she walked through every single day. Then I guess I'd better find them, she said, before they find a way to make me the problem. That's the part that worries me, Maya said, because people like that don't fight you head on. They don't win that way, and they know it. They go after the one thing they can actually take from you. She looked at her friend. They go after who you are. They go after your name, your record, your past. And you live, of all the people in this building, that you have got a past that could sink you if the wrong person got their hands on it. Olivia said nothing, because Maya was right and they both knew it, and neither of them wanted to say out loud how right she was. What neither of them knew yet, standing in that hallway with their coffee going cold, was that the person who had built the trap on the other side of the world had already thought of exactly that. He had already found the name Olivia Hayes on a compromised planning roster. He had already started asking questions about her. And he had already made a phone call to a man with money and connections and a very old grudge against the entire idea of the traditional military, a man who ran a private company called Blackstone Tactical Solutions, a man named Victor Kane who had once worn a uniform himself and now believed with all his cold heart that the future of American warfare belonged to corporations and not to old dinosaurs like James Whitmore. Victor Kane had heard the name Olivia Hayes that very afternoon, and Victor Kane had smiled, because Kane's entire plan depended on one simple thing. It depended on Operation Iron Shield failing. It depended on an extraction going catastrophically wrong, on flag-draped coffins coming home on grieving families and furious headlines in a nation asking how the mighty United States military could bungle a simple rescue so badly. And then right on cue, Kane's people in the right offices would whisper the same sentence into the right ears. Maybe it's time we let the professionals handle this. Maybe it's time we expanded the private contracts. Maybe it's time the corporations took the missions the generals keep getting men killed on. That was the plan. A controlled failure paid for in soldiers' lives, cashed in for the biggest defense contract expansion in a generation. And the plan had exactly one weakness. It required nobody to notice the trap before the soldiers walked into it. For 6 days, nobody had. And then a 31-year-old lieutenant that a general had called sweetheart had put a folder on a table. Kane didn't panic. Men like Kane never panic. He simply picked up the phone and he told the young officer he had recruited inside the planning command, a quiet, invisible, perfectly trusted assistant named Ethan Walker, that there was a problem. A lieutenant, Hayes, intelligence. She'd flagged the corridor. She'd gotten the operation put on hold. So handle it, Ethan Walker had said, his voice tight with the particular fear of a man who had gone much further than he'd ever meant to and now couldn't find the door back. Oh, I intend to, Kane had said, but not the way you're thinking, son. You don't attack a woman like this head on. You don't win that way. She's smarter than the men around her, and that's exactly why they'll turn on her the second I give them a reason. He'd leaned back in his chair in his glass office, a former commander who had traded his stars for a fortune. You know how you beat someone whose only weapon is the truth, Walker? You make them look crazy. You make them look bitter. You dig up whatever's in their past, and you drag it into the light, and you let everybody's own prejudices do the rest. She's a young woman challenging a room full of old men. Trust me, half of them are already looking for a reason to stop listening to her. I'm just going to hand it to them. And so even as Olivia and Maya walked down that hallway believing they had won a small victory, the ground was already shifting under them. Because Victor Kane had just decided to go looking for the one folder Olivia had sworn she would never open. The heavy one. The one in the locked drawer. The 48 hours behind enemy lines. The mission that had made her a hero to a handful of men who could never say her name and a ghost to everyone else. Kane wanted that story, not to honor it, to twist it. Because Kane already understood something that would take Olivia days to fully see. He understood that the most dangerous thing about Olivia Hayes wasn't her intelligence. It was her silence. She had spent 6 years refusing to tell anyone what she'd done, refusing to trade on her past, refusing to make anyone respect her. And a person who won't defend their own history is a person whose history you can rewrite for them. That was Kane's insight. That was his opening. He didn't have to beat the real Olivia Hayes. He just had to invent a fake one first and get everybody to meet the fake one before the real one had a chance to speak. Back in her small office, Olivia sat down at her monitor and got to work. She had 48 hours, one general's attention, and a partner she trusted. She started where any good analyst starts, which is not with the enemy on the ridge, but with the question of how the enemy had known. She pulled the access logs for the operation planning files. She wanted to see every person who had opened the quarter documents and when and from where. Most of it was exactly what you'd expect. Planning staff, command staff, the usual names doing the usual work at the usual hours. But there was one entry that didn't fit. Somebody had accessed the classified satellite data for the extraction region at 4:17 in the morning, 2 nights before the quarter was even chosen. For the decision, before the meeting, somebody had been looking at the exact terrain where the trap would later be built in the dead middle of the night when nobody was watching. Olivia stared at the timestamp, 4:17 a.m., 2 nights early. She checked the access credentials. And the name that came back was a name she barely recognized. A junior name, a forgettable name, the kind of name that belonged to a person you passed in the hallway and never thought about again. An assistant in the planning command. Young, quiet, trusted by everyone precisely because nobody ever noticed him. Ethan Walker. Olivia sat back in her chair and felt the cold weight settle into her chest again. The same weight she'd felt in the briefing when Briggs had asked how anyone outside the room could know the road. Because she had her answer now, or at least the shape of it. It wasn't outside the room, it had never been outside the room. She reached for her phone to call Maya, and as she did, an email notification appeared in the corner of her screen. Internal. Marked urgent, from an office up the chain that had no business emailing a lieutenant directly. The subject line was her own name. She opened it, and she read 6 sentences that told her in the careful, bloodless language of bureaucracy that questions had been raised about Lieutenant Hayes' fitness, that her recent conduct in the Iron Shield briefing had been described by multiple witnesses as erratic and insubordinate, and that given her classified history and prior psychological evaluations, a review of her reliability was being informally initiated as a precaution. Her classified history, her prior psychological evaluations. Somebody had already been into the one folder she never opened. Somebody in the few short hours since she'd walked out of that briefing had reached into the most protected corner of her past, pulled out the parts that could be twisted, and started whispering. And Olivia Hayes, sitting alone in her small, cold office, understood 2 things at once with perfect clarity. The first was that Maya had been exactly right in the hallway. They were not going to fight her head on. They were going to go after who she was. The second was worse, because for someone to have reached that history that fast, they had to have access and reach and a reason, which meant the person she was hunting already knew she was hunting them, which meant she was already behind, which meant that somewhere out there, a man she had never met had looked at her name on a roster that morning and decided that the quiet lieutenant who had never once used her past to make anyone respect her was about to have that past used against her instead. She set the phone down without calling Maya. She looked at the email one more time, and then very slowly Olivia Hayes turned in her chair, unlocked the bottom drawer of her desk, the one she never opened, and looked at the heavy folder that had been waiting there in the dark for 6 years. The folder with her real record. The 48 hours, the men she'd saved and the men she hadn't. Everything she had sworn she would let stay buried. She didn't take it out, not yet. But for the first time since the day they'd classified her name and erased her from the record, Lieutenant Olivia Hayes rested her hand on that folder and understood that the day was coming and coming soon when she was going to have to open it in front of the very men who had laughed at her. Not to prove she was smart, not to prove she was brave, but to prove before it was too late for a team of stranded soldiers, and maybe for her own name as well, that the person the whole building was about to decide she was not the person she actually was. She closed the drawer, she left it unlocked, and she picked up the phone to call Maya, because whatever was coming next, she was not going to face it alone. Maya answered on the first ring, and the first thing she said was, "You didn't call me back for 6 minutes. That's 5 minutes and 40 seconds longer than you ever go. What happened?" "They opened my file," Olivia said. There was a silence on the other end of the line, and in that silence, Olivia could hear her friend's whole face change. "Which file?" Maya said, though she already knew. There was only one file that mattered. The one in the drawer, my real record. Somebody pulled my classified history and my psych evals and started an informal reliability review. 3 hours after I put a folder on Whitmore's table. 3 hours, Maya. That's not possible. That file is buried under clearances you and I don't even have. There are maybe 4 people on this entire base who could touch it. Then one of those 4 people is working against me, Olivia said. Or somebody above them is. Get to my office, come the back way, and don't tell anyone where you're going. 12 minutes later, Maya came through the door without knocking, shut it behind her, and locked it, which was a thing Maya never did. She looked at Olivia sitting at her monitor with the unlocked drawer beside her knee, and she didn't waste a second. Show me the access log, she said. Olivia turned the screen. Maya leaned in, and Olivia watched her friend's eyes move down the column of names and timestamps, watch them stop on the one that didn't belong. The 4:17 in the morning entry, 2 nights before the corridor was even chosen. Ethan Walker. Maya read out loud slow, like she was tasting something rotten. Who is Ethan Walker? An assistant in planning command. Junior. Nobody. I've walked past him 100 times and I couldn't have told you his name yesterday. And he pulled the satellite data for the extraction region at 4 in the morning 2 days early. Before the decision was made, before the meeting, he was looking at the exact terrain where the trap got built in the middle of the night when nobody was watching. Maya straightened up slowly. Then he's your leak. He's part of it, Olivia said. He's the hand that touched the file, but a junior assistant doesn't reach into my classified past 3 hours after a briefing. He doesn't have that reach. Somebody's using him and somebody bigger is using them both. She rubbed her eyes. Maya, I've been an analyst for 9 years. I know what a coincidence looks like and I know what a machine looks like. This is a machine. Somebody built this. Somebody's been running it for weeks. Maya pulled the other chair around and sat down close, dropping her voice even though the door was locked. Okay, then we do this the way we always do it. We don't guess. We build it. We get proof so tight that when you walk into a room with it, there's no version of the story where you're the crazy one. She looked at the drawer. But Liv, that review they started, that's the other half of a plan. They flag Walker's leak on one side, sure, that's real. But on the other side, they've already started making you unreliable. Because if they can make you the crazy bitter analyst who's obsessed with proving herself, then it doesn't matter what proof you bring. They'll say you manufactured it. They'll say you're desperate. I know. So we're in a race. You have to build the truth faster than they can build a lie about you. Maya paused. How fast do you think they move? And as if the world wanted to answer the question for them, Olivia's desk phone rang. Not her cell, the internal line. She looked at the number on the display and her stomach dropped because it was General Whitmore's direct office and she had never in her life received a call from that line. She picked it up. Lieutenant Hayes? Hayes. Whitmore's voice, but wrong, somehow tighter than it had been that morning. My office, now in Hayes, come alone. The line went dead. Olivia set the phone down and looked at Maya, and Maya looked back at her, and neither of them said the thing they were both thinking, which was that a summons like that 3 hours after the folder, with that tone in his voice, was not a good sign. It was the sound of a plan working. He heard something, Maya said quietly. He heard something, Olivia agreed. She stood up. Keep building. Walker's access log, everything he's touched in the last month, every file, every login, every door badge. I want to know where this man eats lunch. And Maya, she stopped at the door. If I don't call you in an hour, you take everything we have and you go over Whitmore's head. Don't wait for me. Maya's jaw set hard. Nobody's going over anybody's head because you're going to walk into that office and you're going to be the calmest, cleanest, most reasonable officer that man has ever met. You do not give them the erratic. You understand me? Whatever he throws at you, you give him quiet. Quiet is the one thing they can't twist. Olivia almost smiled. Look at the evidence before you look at the person presenting it. Damn right, Maya said. The walk to Whitmore's office took 4 minutes and felt like 40. Olivia passed officers she knew, and she noticed the thing you only notice when it's happening to you, the small change in how people's eyes moved. A captain who usually nodded didn't. 2 staff sergeants stopped talking as she passed and started again after she was by. It was nothing. It was everything. It was the sound of a story spreading through a building faster than the truth ever could, and the story wasn't hers. Whitmore's aide waved her straight in, which was its own bad sign, and shut the door behind her. The general was standing behind his desk, and he was not alone. Colonel Briggs was there, the fist-faced man from the morning, and standing by the window was a third man Olivia had never seen before. Civilian suit, expensive. 50s, maybe 60s, silver at the temples, the kind of stillness that expensive men learn when they've stopped needing to prove anything to anyone. He didn't introduce himself. He just watched her walk in with the mild, patient interest of a man watching a problem he already knew how to solve. "Lieutenant Hayes," Whitmore said, "sit down." "I'll stand, sir, if that's all right." "Sit down, Lieutenant." "Not a request." She sat. Whitmore stayed standing, which put him above her, and Olivia understood the geometry of it immediately. This wasn't the man who had put Iron's shield on hold that morning. Something had gotten to him in the hours since. She could see it in his shoulders, the thing she always watched, and his shoulders were not the shoulders of a commander who trusted her anymore. They were the shoulders of a man who'd been handed a story about her and had decided at least partway to believe it. "This morning," Whitmore began, "you brought me a corridor analysis. And I'll be straight with you, Hayes, it was good work. It was disturbing work. I put my operation on hold because of it. I stand by that." "Thank you, sir. But then I started making some calls," Whitmore went on, "because that's what a commander does. He verifies. And what I've been hearing about you in the last couple of hours has given me a great deal of concern." He picked up a piece of paper from his desk, didn't read it, just held it await. "I'm told you have a classified history, a mission that went badly. I'm told there were psychological evaluations. I'm told there's a pattern, Lieutenant, of you inserting yourself into operations of a certain obsessiveness about being the one who sees what others miss. I'm told." "You're told," Olivia said quietly. Whitmore stopped. "Excuse me. You keep saying you're told, sir. By whom?" And there it was, the first crack, because Whitmore didn't want to answer that question, and they both knew it. He glanced just for half a second at the silver-haired man by the window. It was the smallest thing. It was everything. "That's not your concern," Whitmore said. "With respect, sir, it's the only thing that's my concern," Olivia said, keeping her voice exactly where Maya had told her to keep it low and level and clean. "This morning I brought you data. You could check it, verify it, argue with it. That's evidence. What you've been told about me in the last 2 hours isn't evidence, sir. It's a story, and stories have authors. I'd like to know who wrote this one." The silver-haired man by the window smiled faintly and spoke for the first time. "She's good," he said to Whitmore as if Olivia weren't in the room. "You said she was good. I didn't quite believe you until now." Olivia turned her head and looked at him fully for the first time. "I don't believe we've met." "No," the man agreed. "We haven't." And he didn't offer a name, and the not offering was deliberate, a small display of power. "I know who you are, and you don't know who I am." But Olivia had spent her whole career reading things people didn't want read, and she read this man in about 4 seconds. The suit, the stillness, the way Whitmore, a 2-star general, kept glancing at him like a man checking whether he'd said the right thing. This wasn't a subordinate. This wasn't even a peer. This was someone Whitmore was on some level afraid of. "You're not Army," Olivia said. "Not anymore," the man said. "Private sector." "Something like that." "Defense contractor," Olivia said, and she watched his eyes when she said it, and there it was, the tiniest tightening, the flicker of a man who is used to being the one doing the reading and doesn't like the feeling of being read. "And you came all the way to Fort Liberty to sit in a general's office and talk about a lieutenant. That's a lot of interest in someone as unimportant as I've been told I am." Briggs cut in hard. "Watch your tone, Lieutenant." "My tone is fine, Colonel. Colonel, I'm the calmest person in this room." She looked back at Whitmore. "Sir, you called me here alone. You told me to come alone. And I walk in and there are 3 of you, one of whom won't give me his name. If you wanted a reliability review that goes through channels in writing with counsel, this isn't a review. This is an ambush. So I'll ask you plainly, sir, because you've always claimed to respect plain talk. What is it you actually want from me?" For a moment, nobody spoke. And then Whitmore, to his credit, or maybe just because the honesty in the room had finally cornered him, set the paper down and told her the truth. "I want you to drop it," he said. "The corridor thing, the leak thing, all of it. I want you to let the operation planning proceed with a revised route, and I want you to go back to your desk and your screens and let this go." "Why?" "Because you're about to destroy yourself. Hayes, Whitmore said, and the strange thing was there was something almost like concern in it buried under the pressure. Because you're a junior officer with a complicated past who just accused this command of harboring a traitor, and there are people, powerful people, who are very prepared to make sure that accusation ends your career and your reputation and everything else. I've seen it happen. I've watched good officers go down this exact road. You think you're chasing the truth, but the truth doesn't protect you. Being right doesn't protect you. And I'm offering you a way out before this becomes something you can't walk back. It was Olivia realized the closest thing to kindness the man was capable of. And it was also, whether he understood it or not, the exact move Victor Kane wanted him to make. Because a warning that sounds like protection is still a warning, and a way out that requires you to stop looking is still a trap. She thought about the men on the other side of the world. The reconnaissance team hidden for 6 days now, 7 counting the hours. She thought about the kill box on the Eastern Ridge patient professional waiting. She thought about the fact that if she said yes right now, if she took the way out, those men would walk into it because a revised route wouldn't matter to an enemy that could be told the revision the same way they'd been told the first one. Sir, she said, can I ask you one question before I answer? Go ahead. If I drop it and the operation goes forward and that team gets extracted safely and I'm wrong about all of it, then in a month, none of this matters and you'll have been right to warn me and I'll go back to my screens and feel foolish. And that's the end of it. She leaned forward slightly. But if I drop it and I'm right and that team walks into the box I showed you this morning and they die, then I'll have known. I'll have sat in this chair and known and chosen my career over their lives. Can you tell me, sir, as a man who has buried soldiers, which of us could live with that, you or me? The silence that followed was the longest one yet. Whitmore's jaw worked. Briggs looked at the floor, and the silver-haired man by the window stopped smiling. That's very moving, the man said, but you're assuming your analysis is correct. Psychological literature is full of people who are absolutely certain, Lieutenant. Certainty feels exactly the same whether you're right or you're sick. That's the cruel part. And Olivia turned to him, and for the first time, she let just a little bit of steel into her quiet. You keep using that word. Psychological. You have used it 3 times now. A man who won't give me his name, who I've never met, keeps circling back to my mental state. Why does a private defense contractor care so much about a lieutenant's psychology? She let it sit. Unless somebody hired you to build exactly that story, the unstable analyst, the obsessive junior officer with the tragic classified past. It's a good story, sir. It's a very good story. It fits everybody's prejudices. Young woman, old generals, a room full of people who already wanted a reason to stop listening to her. She looked back at Whitmore. But it's a story, and I brought you data, and you still, right now, in this room, have to choose which one you're going to trust. Whitmore closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, something in his face had moved just slightly back toward the man from that morning. Get out, he said, but he wasn't saying it to Olivia. He was saying it to the silver-haired man. The room went dead still. James, the man said, mild warning. I said, get out of my office, Victor, Whitmore said. And the moment he said the name, Olivia filed it away like a round chambered. Victor, a first name and thread. Because I invited you here as a courtesy, as an old friend, to give me your read on a situation, and instead I've watched you spend 10 minutes trying to talk me into shutting down my own analyst. And I've been in this army long enough to know that when a contractor is that eager to make a problem go away, the contractor is usually part of the problem. So get out and take your read with you. Victor Kane, because that was who he was, though. Olivia didn't have the last name yet, stood there for a long moment. And then he did something that told Olivia more than anything else had. He didn't argue. He didn't get angry. He simply smiled again. That patient, expensive smile buttoned his jacket and walked to the door. Because a man who has other ways to win doesn't waste energy on a battle he's already decided to root around. At the door, he paused and looked back not at Whitmore but at Olivia. It really is impressive, he said. What you can do with a folder. I hope for your sake you never have to find out how fast a folder can be filled with other things. And then he was gone. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Briggs let out a break, and Whitmore sat down heavily in his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 61 years, and rubbed his hand across his mouth to tell the ground moving. Sir, Olivia said carefully. Who was that? That, Whitmore said, was Victor Kane. He ran a brigade under me 20 years ago. Good officer, cold as a January morning even then. He got out, went private, built a company. He shook his head slowly. Blackstone Tactical Solutions. They do contract security and logistics training. And for the last year, they've been lobbying every office in this building and half the ones in Washington to expand private military contracts. Big money, bigger than you'd believe. And Kane's been at the front of all of it. Olivia felt three separate pieces of the puzzle click into place at once, and the feeling was not relief. It was dread. Sir, a private company that profits when the military looks incompetent, a leak that steered an extraction toward a kill box, and the head of that company sitting in your office 2 hours later trying to convince you the analyst who caught it is crazy. She let the pieces sit side by side where he could see them. You called him an old friend. I need to know right now, sir. And I need the truth. Is there any chance you're part of this? Briggs came out of his chair. How dare you? But Whitmore raised a hand and stopped him, and looked at Olivia, and to his eternal credit, he understood why she'd asked. That's a fair question, he said quietly. It's the exact question I'd ask if I were you, and I'd just watch it what you watched. He met her eyes. No, Lieutenant, I'm not part of it. This morning I laughed a warning out of my own war room and almost sent men to die because I was too proud to read a folder. That's my sin today. But I have never in 34 years traded a soldier's life for a contract, and I would put a bullet in the man who did, old friend or not. He held her gaze. You're going to have to decide whether to believe me, because we can't do this if you don't. Olivia studied his shoulders one more time, and they were, she decided, telling the truth. I believe you, sir, she said. But here's what I need you to understand. Kane didn't come here today to warn me. He came here to read the room, to see how far this had gotten and whether you'd been turned and whether I could be scared off. And now he knows. He knows the operation's on hold. He knows you're not on his side, and he knows I'm not going to drop it. She stood up, which means from this moment on, we're not investigating a leak anymore. We're in a race against a man with money, connections, and every reason in the world to make sure Operation Iron Shield fails before we can prove it was rigged. Whitmore stood too. Then tell me what you need. I need Ethan Walker, Olivia said. Show him. The assistant in planning. He accessed the satellite data at 4:17 in the morning, 2 nights before the corridor was chosen. He's the hand that touched the leak. He's junior, he's scared, and if I'm reading this right, he's in way over his head. Men like Kane don't recruit true believers for the wet work. They recruit frightened people who took one step too far and can't find their way back. Walker's the crack in the wall. I want to talk to him before Kane realizes Walker's the crack too. Then move, Whitmore said. Both of you. Briggs, you give her whatever she needs, and you keep your mouth shut about it. Nobody outside this room. And Hayes. He stopped her at the door the same way Kane had, but the words were different. This morning I called you sweetheart and threw your folder on the floor. I've been in this uniform a long time, and I've made my share of mistakes, but that's one I'm going to be chewing on for a while. So, for what it's worth, he straightened. I'm sorry, Lieutenant. Olivia looked at him. She hadn't asked for it. She told herself she didn't need it. But standing in that doorway, she understood that an apology from a man like Whitmore wasn't about her at all. It was about him becoming in real time the commander he was supposed to be. Save it, sir, she said, not unkindly. Give it to me after we get those men home. Then it'll mean something. And she walked out. Maya was waiting in the hallway, and one look at Olivia's face told her the hour hadn't gone the way either of them feared. You're not fired, Maya said. I'm not fired, but... Whitmore's back, and it's worse than we thought. She kept walking fast, and Maya fell in beside her. The man who pulled my file, the man who started the review, the man who's building the crazy analyst story, it's a contractor, Blackstone Tactical. CEO's name is Victor Kane, former Army, ran a brigade under Whitmore 20 years ago. He was in the office when I walked in Maya. He was in the general's office, trying to talk him into shutting me down. Maya stopped dead. The CEO of a defense contractor was physically in Whitmore's office today. Sat by the window like he owned it. Wouldn't give his name until Whitmore let it slip. And here's the part I can't shake. Olivia turned to face her friend. He kept circling my mental health. Over and over. Psychological unstable certainty feels the same as sickness. A total stranger working my psyche evals like he'd studied them, which means he has them, Maya. He's already read the file I've kept locked in a drawer for 6 years. He knows what happened behind enemy lines. He knows about the men we lost. And he is going to take the worst 48 hours of my life, and he is going to rebuild them into a weapon and point it at my head. Then we get ahead of it, Maya said. We tell your story first. Your way, clean. That's exactly what he's counting on me not being able to do, Olivia said. Because to tell it, I have to open the file. And the second I open the file, I'm the officer who wouldn't stop talking about her classified glory days, the one who needed everyone to know how special she was. He's built a box, Maya. If I stay quiet, he rewrites my past for me. If I speak up, I become the person he says I am. There's no clean move. He's thought of everything. Not everything, Maya said, and there was something in her voice that made Olivia stop. Because while you were in there, I ran Walker. Every login, every badge swipe, every door for 30 days. And I found something. Show me. Not here. Maya glanced down the hallway at the officers whose eyes had changed at the story spreading through the building like a stain. Somewhere with no cameras. Somewhere Kane's story can't follow us. 10 minutes later, they were in a record storage room in the basement, the kind of place nobody went where the air smelled like dust and old paper, and the only camera had been broken for 2 years. Maya pulled out a tablet, kept her voice down to almost nothing. Ethan Walker, she said, 26 years old, 2 years in planning, spotless record, which is the first thing that bothered me, because nobody's spotless. Everybody's got a late badge swipe or a login from the wrong terminal, and this kid had nothing. Until about 6 weeks ago, she swiped. 6 weeks ago, his pattern changes. Late nights he never used to work. Access to files 3 pay grades above what his job requires. And this, she held up the tablet, 4 cash deposits into an account we're not supposed to be able to see spread out, so no single one triggers a report. Totals about $90,000 for a kid who makes 40 a year. Olivia stared at the numbers. Somebody bought him. Somebody bought him 6 weeks ago, right around the time Iron Shield started getting planned. Maya lowered the tablet. But that's not the part that's going to keep you up tonight, Liv. She swiped one more time. The deposits. I traced them back as far as I could before the trail went into a shell company and disappeared. But the shell company has a name on the incorporation paperwork from 4 years ago before anybody thought to hide it. And the name is Blackstone Tactical Solutions. Olivia's breath went still in her chest. That's it. That's the wire. Kane's money into a shell, into Walker 6 weeks ago. That's the connection. That's the whole thing. She looked up, and for the first time in the entire long day, there was something fierce and clean in her eyes. Maya, that's not a story. That's not a psych eval. That's a bank record. That's the one thing Kane can't call crazy. I know, Maya said, but she wasn't smiling. Which is exactly why I'm scared. Because if we found it this fast, Liv, then Kane knows it's findable. And a man who's thought of everything else has thought of that too. That money trail is the one hard piece of evidence that can put him in prison. Which makes Ethan Walker, the kid on the other end of it, the single most dangerous loose end Victor Kane has in the world right now. The two women looked at each other in the dusty basement light, and the same cold thought arrived in both of them at the exact same second. Olivia was already moving toward the door. We have to get to Walker. Liv. Now Maya. We have to get to him tonight before Kane does, because the second Kane realizes that kid can send him to prison. Liv. Maya grabbed her arm and stopped her and held up the tablet one last time, and her face had gone gray. That's what I've been trying to tell you. I pulled Walker's badge data on the way down here. His last swipe. He badged out of the building at 4:40 this afternoon, and he never badged back in. His phone's been off since 5. His car's still in the lot. And about 20 minutes ago, the base got a call. Maya swallowed. Somebody found a young man's ID and a jacket at the boat ramp down by the river. No sign of the man, just the ID, just the jacket, sitting there, left where somebody would be sure to find them. The name on the ID was Ethan Walker. He's not dead, Olivia said. Maya stared at her. Liv, they found his ID and his jacket at a boat ramp. His phone's off. His car's abandoned. That's exactly why he's not dead. Olivia was already climbing the basement stairs, 2 at a time, Maya scrambling after her. Think, Maya. Think like Cain. If you killed a man, would you leave his ID sitting on a boat ramp where the base is guaranteed to find it within the hour? You'd sink it. You'd burn it. You'd make it disappear along with the body. You do not leave a neon sign that says, "Come look at this river." She hit the top of the stairs and stopped and turned. The ID isn't a body dump. It's a message. It's staged. Cain wants us to believe Walker walked into that water because a dead informant tells no stories and a suicide closes the file. It's clean. It's tragic. It's over. Case closed. The traitor drowned himself out of guilt. Nobody looks any deeper. Maya caught up, breathing hard. Then where is he? If I'm right, Cain has him. Somewhere off base, somewhere quiet, and Walker is worth more to him alive for the next day or two than dead, because Cain needs to know exactly what the kid told us and whether there's anything he missed cleaning up. Olivia started walking again fast toward the intelligence wing, which means Ethan Walker has maybe 48 hours before he stops being useful. And the clock started the second that ID hit the boat ramp. It was 6:52 in the evening. They found an empty analysis room, locked the door, and Olivia laid it out on the table like she was briefing a mission, because she was. 3 problems, she said, holding up fingers. 1, Walker. He's alive. He's the only living human being who can put Cain in a courtroom, and he's in the wind. 2, the story. By tomorrow morning, the base narrative is going to be that a troubled young officer killed himself, and riding right alongside it, courtesy of Cain, is going to be a second story about an obsessive female analyst who hounded a fragile kid until he broke. That's coming, Maya. He's going to tie Walker's death around my neck. She held up the 3rd finger. And 3, Iron Shield. Those men on the ridge are still out there, still hidden, still counting on us. And Whitmore only bought 48 hours. That window closes tomorrow night, whether we're ready or not. Maya sat down slowly. 3 fires, 2 of us, no time. So we don't put out all 3, Olivia said. We find the one that puts out the other 2, and that's Walker. If we find Walker alive, he confirms the leak, he confirms the money, he confirms Cain, and every other fire goes out at once. The suicide story dies. The crazy analyst story dies. And Whitmore has everything he needs to blow Iron Shield wide open and drag Cain out of that glass office in handcuffs. She planted both hands on the table. Walker is the whole game. We find the kid, we win. We don't. Cain wins, and men die on 2 continents. So, where would you hide a person you didn't want found? And that was the moment Olivia's cell phone buzzed against the table. Unknown number. The 2 women looked at it. It buzzed again. Olivia answered on speaker and said nothing. For a second, there was only breathing on the line. Young breathing, fast, ragged, terrified, and then a voice barely above a whisper cracking on every other word. Is this Lieutenant Hayes? Olivia's eyes snapped to Maya. She kept her own voice absolutely level. This is Hayes. Who's this? You don't? You don't know me. My name's Ethan. Ethan Walker. I work in planning. His breath hitched. They're saying I'm dead. I'm looking at it right now. Somebody sent me. They're saying they found my body at the river, and I'm not dead. I'm not dead. Oh God. I ran. I got out. I've been walking for 2 hours. I don't know where to go. I don't know who I can. The voice broke completely. You're the only name I had. You flagged the corridor. You're the only person in that whole building who was trying to stop it. Please, please, I think they're going to kill me. It was 7:08 in the evening. Olivia closed her eyes for 1 second, 1 single second, and let herself feel the enormity of it. The boy at the other end of the line, the whole case breathing on speaker, everything they needed and everything that could go wrong, all wrapped up in one terrified 26-year-old. Then she opened her eyes and became the calmest person on earth. Ethan, listen to me. You did the right thing calling. You're going to be okay, but I need you to do exactly what I say and nothing else. First, is your phone on right now? Yeah, turn it off the second we hang up. They can find you through it. Every minute it's on is a minute they're closing in. Do you understand? Yeah, okay, yeah. Second, where are you? Not the address. Just tell me what you see. I'm at it's a gas station. Off the highway, there's a diner across the street. It's got a red sign. It says something with a rooster on it. Maya was already typing, already searching, and she pointed at the screen and mouthed 12 miles, and Olivia nodded. I know that diner, Olivia said. I know exactly where you are. Ethan, I need you to walk behind the gas station out of the light, and I need you to wait. Not out front, not where the road can see you. Behind it in the dark, and you keep your phone off, and you don't talk to anyone, and you wait for a gray Honda. Just a gray Honda, nothing military, nothing marked. Can you do that? How do I know it's you? The kid whispered. How do I know it's not them? And it was a good question, a smart question, the question of someone who had learned in the last 3 hours exactly how alone a person could be. Olivia felt something in her chest that had surprised her because it wasn't strategy. It was pity. When the car pulls up, she said the driver's going to roll down the window and say one word. She's going to say folder. Just that, folder. If anyone comes to you and doesn't say that word, you run. You hear me. You run and you call this number back. But if she says folder, you get in and you're safe and this is over. Okay, a long shaking breath. Okay. Turn your phone off now, Ethan, I'm coming. The line went dead. Maya was already grabbing her jacket. I'll go. Gray Honda, that's mine. It's in the north lot. You can't go live if this is a setup, if Kane's using the kid to draw you out. It's not a setup. Olivia stood. You heard him. Nobody fakes that. That kid is exactly as scared as he sounds. Or Kane found somebody who can act. Live an hour ago, that man stood in a general's office and threatened to fill a folder with your name on it. He wants you gone. And now 1 hour later, a mysterious call lures you 12 miles off base into the dark. You taught me this. You taught me that when something arrives exactly when your enemy needs it, you assume your enemy sent it. And Olivia stopped because Maya was right. Maya was using her own rules against her, and they were good rules. She stood there in the locked room and made herself run. It cold the way she ran everything cold. Was it a trap? It could be. The timing was suspicious. The kid appearing out of nowhere the same hour Kane wanted her drawn out was exactly the kind of thing she'd flag on anybody else. But his voice, Olivia said slowly. Maya, he asked how he'd know it was really me and not them. A person Kane sent to bait me doesn't ask that. A person Kane sent already knows who's on the other end. That question only makes sense if he's actually running for his life and actually can't tell friend from enemy anymore. She shook her head. It's real. And even if there's a chance it isn't, we can't not go, because if it's real and we don't go, that kid dies tonight and the case dies with him. Kane knows that too. That's the trap, Maya. Not the phone call. The choice. He's made it so that going is dangerous and not going is fatal. And when your enemy builds you a box like that, you don't refuse to move. You just move smarter than he thinks you can. She looked at her friend. So here's how we do it smarter. You don't go to that diner, I do. You go the opposite direction. You take everything we have, the access logs, the money trail, the Blackstone Incorporation papers, all of it, and you get it to Whitmore tonight in his hands so that no matter what happens to me at that gas station, the evidence lives. If I disappear, the case doesn't disappear with me. That's the one thing Kane can't plan around. He can take one of us. He can't take the truth once it's in a general's hands. Maya's jaw was tight. I don't like splitting up. Neither do I. But it's the only move where losing me doesn't mean losing everything. Olivia was already pulling her own keys. I'll take a base pool car. Gray. Nothing marked, just like I told him. You get to Whitmore. And Maya. She stopped at the door. If I don't call you by 9, you don't come looking for me. You finish it. You promise me. I'm not promising you that. Maya. I said, I'm not promising you that, so ask me for something I'll actually do. Maya shoved the tablet into her bag. Go get the kid, I'll get the general. And you call me the second that Honda is moving, or I swear to God, I will light this entire base on fire looking for you. It was 7:23. The drive took 19 minutes on roads Olivia knew by heart. She spent every one of them running scenarios because that was how she kept her hand steady. And by the time she saw the red rooster sign glowing across the highway, she had played out every version of the next 10 minutes she could think of. The kid alone and real. The kid flanked by Kane's men. An empty lot and a bullet from the dark. She had made peace with all of them the way she'd made peace with things a long time ago. In another country in a folder she still hadn't opened. She killed her headlights 100 yards out and rolled slow past the gas station once reading it. 2 cars at the pumps, ordinary. A trucker. Nobody standing, nobody watching, nobody sitting in a parked vehicle with the patient stillness of a man waiting to hurt someone. It looked clean, clean enough. She pulled around back into the dark behind the building and rolled down her window. For a second, there was nothing, just shadow. And then a shape peeled itself off the wall. A young man, thin, hunched, hollow-eyed jacket, gone shivering in a t-shirt. Though it wasn't cold, holding himself the way people hold themselves when they've been afraid so long the fear has become the only thing keeping them upright. Olivia looked at him and said one word, folder. The kid made a sound that was half a sob and half a laugh, and he stumbled to the car and got in and pulled the door shut and folded forward over his own knees. Shaking, and Olivia hit the locks and pulled out slow and easy. Nothing sudden. Nothing that would catch an eye back onto the highway, back toward the base. And it wasn't until they were 3 miles gone that Ethan Walker sat up and looked at her and started finally to talk. It was 6 weeks ago, he said. His voice was wrecked. There was a guy, not Kane. I didn't know Kane's name till later. Just a guy said he was a recruiter for a contractor, said they were doing a transition study, said they'd pay me a consulting fee to just tell them what planning was working on. Innocent stuff, timelines, nothing classified. That's what he said, nothing classified. And the money was so much, Lieutenant, it was so much money. My mom's sick. I've got these. He stopped himself. It doesn't matter. I took it. I took the money and I told myself it was nothing. And then it stopped being nothing, Olivia said quietly, eyes on the road. And then it stopped being nothing. He put his face in his hands. It got specific. They wanted the extraction planning. They wanted me to leave certain files open, to pull certain satellite data at certain times. And I knew by then, and I knew it was wrong. I knew it was way past wrong, but they had the deposits. They had records of everything I'd already done. And the guy said, if I stopped, if I said one word, they'd hand it all to CID, and I'd spend 15 years in Leavenworth as a traitor. So I kept going. God help me, kept going. I pulled the satellite data. I'm the reason. I'm the reason those men are... His voice shattered. Are they dead? The extraction team. Did I kill them? And this was the moment Olivia understood that would decide whether Ethan Walker was a witness or a wreck. So she pulled off onto the shoulder, put the car in park, turned in her seat, and looked the shaking boy dead in the eye. Listen to me, she said. Those men are alive. Right now, tonight, they are alive because I caught the corridor before anybody walked into it, and the operation is on hold. Do you understand? Nobody died. You did something wrong, Ethan. You did something very wrong, and you're going to have to answer for it. But you have not killed anyone. There is still time to make this the story of the man who blew it wide open instead of the man who let it happen. That story is still available to you. But only if you're brave for about one more day. Can you be brave for one more day? The kid looked at her like she'd thrown him a rope across a canyon. They said you were crazy, he whispered. Kane, I heard him on the phone. He said you were an unstable analyst obsessed with your own past, and nobody would believe a word you said. He was laughing about it. I'm sure he was, Olivia said. But you're not crazy. Walker wiped his face. You're the only sane person in this whole thing. It was 7:58. She pulled back onto the highway, and she had him. She had the whole case sitting in her passenger seat, breathing and alive and willing to talk, and for about 90 seconds, Olivia Hayes let herself believe it was going to be simple from here. Get to base, get Walker to Whitmore. Money Trail Live, witness satellite logs, all of it in front of a 2-star general by 9 o'clock. Kane in cuffs by morning. The men on the ridge home by the weekend. Then her phone rang, and it was Maya, and Maya's voice was wrong. Liv, where are you? 9 minutes out, I've got him. Walker's alive. He's talking. He's giving me all of it. Are you with Whitmore? That's why I'm calling. Maya's words came fast and low. I got to Whitmore's office 10 minutes ago. He's gone, Liv. His aide says he got a call an hour ago and left the base. Personal vehicle. Didn't say where, and here's the part I can't. Maya's voice dropped further. The call. I pushed the aide. The call that pulled Whitmore off base tonight. It came from Kane. Victor Kane called your general an hour ago, and now your general is out there somewhere in the dark off base alone, and nobody knows where. The road blurred for a second in front of Olivia's eyes. No, she said. No, Whitmore's clean. I watched his shoulders. Maya, I read him. He threw Kane out of his own office. I know, I believe you. But Liv, think about what Kane just did. He couldn't turn Whitmore in that office with you watching. So he pulled him out where nobody's watching. And a general who won't be turned is a general who has to be. Maya couldn't finish it. But she didn't have to, because in the passenger seat, Ethan Walker had gone rigid, gone white, and he was staring at the phone like it was a snake. What did she just say? He breathed. Did she say Kane called a general? Did she say a general went off base to meet Kane tonight? Ethan. No, no, no. The kid was shaking his head, fast frantic. That's not a meeting. Lieutenant, that's not a meeting. I heard them 3 days ago. I heard Kane and the recruiter talking about a contingency. They called it the contingency in case anybody senior figured it out, in case a commander wouldn't play along. They said, his voice climbed toward panic. They said if a general ever became a problem, they wouldn't fight him. They'd make him disappear the same way they were going to make the extraction disappear. Make it look like it's something else. An accident, a heart attack, a car off a road at night. He grabbed the dashboard. If Kane called your general out into the dark tonight, then your general isn't going to a meeting. He's going to an accident. And Lieutenant Walker turned to her, and the terror in his face was total. The recruiter, the contingency. There was a location. They always use the same place for the quiet stuff. It's a hunting property off the county road north of the base. That's where they take people they don't want found. Olivia's whole body went cold and clear at once. Maya, she said into the phone, and her voice had changed, had dropped into something flat and terrible and calm. Ethan knows where Whitmore is. There's a property north of the base off the county road, a hunting lease. That's Kane's contingency site. That's where they took people. Whitmore's there, or he's on his way there, and if we're right about what Kane's planning, he's got maybe minutes, not hours. I'm calling the MPS, I'm calling CID, You can't. And it broke Olivia's heart to say it. You call the base, you call the MPs, half of them might be clean, but we don't know which half. And if one dirty ear hears it, Kane just accelerates, and Whitmore's dead before anybody arrives, and the story's already written, tragic accident, grieving contractor, case closed. We can't trust the building, Pia. We just spent all day proving the building can't be trusted. She was already accelerating, already reading the dark road ahead, already doing the terrible math. It has to be us, right now. You know the county road. Liv, you have Walker in that car. You have the only witness. If you drive into Kane's kill site with the one person who can convict him, you're handing Kane everything he wants in one place. That's the trap. That's the real trap, not the diner. He didn't pull Whitmore out there to kill a general. He pulled him out there knowing you'd come running so he could get all three of you, the general, the witness, and the analyst, in one dark place with no cameras and no help. Maya's voice cracked. Don't you see it? You go up that road and Kane wins everything at once. And Olivia Hayes drove into the dark, one hand on the wheel, and a terrified witness beside her, and a general somewhere ahead of her, running out of minutes. And she understood that Maya was right about all of it, that it was a trap. Inside a trap, that every road led to Kane, that the man had built a machine with no clean exit and had been 3 steps ahead all day long. And she understood one more thing, the thing that had been waiting in a locked drawer for 6 years. There was exactly one version of Olivia Hayes who could walk into a dark place with no backup, no help, no cameras, and no rules against armed men, and come back out with everyone alive. She wasn't the analyst. She wasn't the lieutenant they'd laughed at in the war room. She was the person in the folder, the 48 hours behind enemy lines, the version of herself she had buried on purpose because of what she'd had to become to save those men and what it had cost and the ones she couldn't save. Kane had spent all day trying to use that past to destroy her. He was about to find out what it actually was. Maya, Olivia said very quietly, and she reached down and pulled the phone off speaker and put it to her ear so the kid couldn't hear. Get to the county road. Stay back, lights off half a mile short, and do not come in until I tell you. I'm going to get Whitmore. I'm going to get him out. Liv, you can't go in there alone. You're one analyst against. I'm not going in as an analyst, Olivia said. And she hung up the phone and drove into the dark toward the place where Victor Kane was waiting for the woman he had spent all day trying to convince the world was weak. It was 8:11 in the evening. She drove the last 2 miles with her headlights off, and Ethan Walker didn't say a word because there was something about the way Lieutenant Hayes had gone quiet that told him he was sitting next to a different person than the one who'd picked him up. It was 8:24 when she found the turn off an unmarked gravel road slipping off the county highway into a black wall of trees, and she rolled past it, killed the engine a quarter mile down, and sat for exactly 10 seconds with her hands on the wheel, doing the thing she hadn't done in 6 years, which was to reach back into a part of herself she'd buried on purpose and pull it up into the light. "Ethan," she said, "you're going to stay in this car." "No." The kid's voice shook, but the word was firm. "No, I'm the only one who knows the layout. I heard them describe it. There's a main lodge and there's an outbuilding. They use the outbuilding for the quiet stuff. That's where which is exactly why you can't come. You're the case, Ethan. You're the whole case. If you die tonight, Kane walks, and every man on that ridge walks into the box, and everything I've done today means nothing. You are worth more sitting in this car with the doors locked than you are anywhere else on earth. So here's what you're going to do." She pressed her phone into his hands. "Maya's number's up. She's half a mile back on the county road right now. If I'm not back in 20 minutes, or if you hear anything that sounds like gunfire, you call her and you tell her to come in loud and get you out, and you do not under any circumstances come after me. Say it back. 20 minutes, call Maya. Don't come after you." His eyes were wet. "Lieutenant, you're going to walk in there alone against armed men. That's suicide." Olivia checked the pistol she'd signed out from the base armory, a thing she hadn't fired outside a range in 6 years, and slid it back into her waistband and looked at the terrified boy she'd pulled off a gas station wall an hour ago. "There's a version of me that walked into worse than this and walked out," she said quietly. "I put her in a drawer a long time ago because of what she cost me. I'm taking her back out tonight. Lock the doors." And she was gone into the trees. It was 8:29. She moved the way the folder had taught her to move, low and slow and silent. Reading the dark, and the old thing came back faster than she expected. Faster than she wanted. Muscle and instinct that 6 years of screens and satellite feeds had never quite erased. The lodge came up on her left, lit and warm, 2 vehicles out front, one of them a black SUV. She'd have bet her career belonged to Blackstone, but it wasn't the lodge she wanted. Walker had said the outbuilding and the quiet building, and she found it 40 yards past the lodge, a low dark structure with a single light burning in one window, and one man standing outside the door with the bored, patient posture of a professional who'd been told to watch a door and expected nothing to come through the trees. He expected nothing. That was his mistake. Olivia watched him for 90 seconds, learned his pattern, the way he shifted his weight the moment his attention drifted to his phone, and when the moment came, she crossed the open ground behind him like a shadow crossing water, and she took him down, the way the folder had taught her, quick and quiet, an arm across the throat, a knee, the weight of her whole body. And she held it until he went slack, and she lowered him to the ground and took his radio and his sidearm and left him breathing in the dirt because Olivia Hayes had killed exactly enough men in her life to know she never wanted to again if she had a choice. It was 8:36. She put her back against the wall beside the lit window and listened, and what she heard turned her blood to ice water. Whitmore's voice, alive, but hurt, strained, the voice of a man who'd been hit and was working to keep his dignity anyway. "You always were a coward, Victor. 20 years and you're still a coward. You couldn't beat me in a war room, so you dragged me out to the woods." And then Kane's voice, calm, patient, that same expensive stillness from the office, only colder now with nothing to perform for. "It's not cowardice, James, it's efficiency. You're a good soldier. That was always the problem with you. Good soldiers can't see the shape of the future, they can only see the next hill. The future is private, James. The future is companies who can do this faster and cheaper and without a Congress and a press corps looking over every operation. All I needed was one clean example of the old way failing. One extraction that went wrong. A few flag-draped coffins and a grieving nation asking why. And you would have been the general who bungled it, and I would have been the man with the solution, and the contracts would have followed for 20 years. Men were going to die for your stock price. Men die for worse reasons every day." A pause. "It could still have been clean, James. If your little analyst hadn't gotten lucky with a satellite feed, do you know I almost admire her. Hayes, I spent all afternoon reading her file, and it's remarkable what she did behind enemy lines, what she became. Which is exactly why I made sure everyone who mattered thought she was crazy before she could open her mouth. The most dangerous witness in the world is a hero nobody's allowed to believe in. Standing in the dark, Olivia felt something she hadn't expected to feel. Not rage. Rage was hot and stupid and got people killed. What she felt was cold and clear and almost grateful because Victor Kane had just told her in his own words the exact shape of the trap he'd built. And a trap you can see the shape of is a trap you can break. So what now, Whitmore said. You put a bullet in a general and call it what? A car accident, Kane said. The county road's terrible at night. A grieving old soldier, a few drinks a curve taken too fast. Tragic. And by morning, your erratic little analyst, wild with grief and paranoia, having chased a fine young officer to suicide in a river, and now a beloved general to his death, will finally be seen for what I've spent all day telling everyone she is. Unstable, dangerous, discredited, and her wild accusations about me will die right along with her credibility. A soft sound, a chair, a man standing. It's really quite complete, James. That's the difference between us. You fight battles, I build machines. And that was the moment Olivia Hayes stepped into the doorway with a Blackstone man's sidearm in her hand and said, then let's see how your machine handles a variable you didn't account for. It was 8:41. The room froze. Whitmore in a chair, blood at his temple, hands zip-tied, staring at her like she was a ghost. Kane standing over him, a pistol loose in his hand, turning slowly, and to his enormous credit, not showing one flicker of fear, only that same cold interest, the man who was always 3 steps ahead, recalculating in real time. And one more Blackstone man in the corner already reaching. Don't, Olivia said to the man in the corner, and something in her voice, something that came up out of the folder, out of the 48 hours, made him stop with his hand halfway to his weapon. I've had a very long day, and I have exactly enough patience left for one of you to do something stupid, and I'd rather it be him. She nodded at Kane without taking her eyes off the corner. Weapon on the floor, now. The corner man looked at Kane. Kane smiled. Lieutenant Hayes, in the flesh. I was just talking about you. I heard, weapon on the floor or I put your employer on the floor. His choice, your consequence. You're not going to shoot anyone, Kane said, easy, conversational, and he began to walk slow, casual, putting himself between Olivia and the window, changing the geometry, and Olivia understood he was buying seconds, that the downed man outside would be missed, that more were in the lodge 40 yards away. You're an analyst. You read screens. You said so yourself this morning, or rather Whitmore said it for you. There's a canyon of difference between reading a battle and standing in one. You read my file, Olivia said. You said so 30 seconds ago through that window, so you already know which side of the canyon I've stood on. She let the barrel drift a quarter inch. You spent all day telling everyone I was the analyst who reads screens. You did that on purpose, Victor. You built a whole story about the timid little intelligence officer who's never seen combat, and you were so busy selling that story to everybody else that you forgot to check whether you believed it yourself. That was your mistake. You mistook the version of me I let people see for the only version that exists. For the first time, something moved behind Victor Kane's eyes. Not fear. Recalculation. The first hairline crack in a man who did not crack. Untie the general, Olivia said. You, coroner, slow. And if I don't, Kane said you'll shoot me. And my 4 men in the lodge will hear it, and this becomes a gunfight you can't win, and the story I've built writes its own ending. The unstable analyst, guns blazing in the woods. You see, Lieutenant, I've thought about every version of tonight, including this one. There is no move you make that I haven't already priced in. And this was the moment Olivia knew the real climax of the entire long day. Not a matter of the gun in her hand, but of the thing between her ears, because Kane was right about the gunfight, right about the men in the lodge, right? That shooting was the ending he'd already written. He'd built a machine with no clean exit, so she didn't take the exit he'd built. She took the one he hadn't. You're right, Olivia said. I can't win a gunfight against 5 men, so I'm not going to have one. And she reached into her jacket with her free hand, slow, and pulled out her cell phone and held it up so he could see the screen, so he could see that it was in a call, that it had been in a call the entire time, that the timer was running 11 minutes and counting. Maya, she said to the phone, did you get all of that? And Maya's voice came out of the little speaker, tinny and clear, and absolutely steady into the frozen room. Every word live. The extraction plan, the stock price, the car accident he's got planned for a 2-star general, the part where he admits he framed you, all of it. Recorded and already uploaded 3 separate places the second he said men die for worse reasons. It's out, Liv. It's already out. It's done. The color left Victor Kane's face. It was 8:44. You see, Olivia said, and she stepped fully into the room now. Because the gun had never been the weapon. The gun had only ever been to keep his attention on the wrong hand. You built a machine that runs on one fuel, Victor. Secrecy. Every part of your plan needed nobody to know until it was too late. The trap on the ridge needed nobody to see it. The leak needed nobody to trace it. The car accident needs nobody to have heard you plan it. You are a man who wins in the dark. So I didn't fight you in the dark. I just turned the lights on. I walked in here with a gun in one hand and a live microphone in the other, and I let you do the one thing men like you can never resist doing. I let you explain how clever you are. And you did. For 11 minutes. On the record. You, for the first time all day, Victor Kane had nothing. The men in the lodge won't help you now, Olivia went on, quiet, relentless, because there's nothing left to protect. The secret's already gone. Every second any of them spends in this building from here forward is just adding years to their sentence. And men like the ones you hire, Victor, they're loyal to money, and you just stopped being able to pay them. So, she looked at the man in the corner. You've got about a 10-second window to decide whether you're a witness or a defendant. I'd move. The corner man looked at Kane, looked at the phone, looked at the door, and put his weapon on the floor. It was 8:46. The next 4 minutes moved fast. Olivia cut Whitmore free herself, and the old general came up out of that chair shaking with a fury that had nowhere left to go. And he looked at Kane, and he looked at the woman he had called sweetheart and thrown a folder at 12 hours ago, and something happened in his weathered face that Olivia would remember for the rest of her life. Maya came in loud 2 minutes later with Ethan Walker, white-faced behind her. Because the second that the recording was safe, she'd broken every speed limit on the county road. And behind Maya finally came the flashing lights, because the moment the recording hit 3 secure locations, Maya had made exactly 1 phone call. Not to the base, not to anyone Kane could have bought, but straight to a federal field office, 2 hours away, with a copy of the file and 11 words a defense contractor is about to murder a United States general. The FBI does not care whose stock price it is. They took Victor Kane out of that outbuilding in handcuffs at 9:02 in the evening. And the machine, the beautiful, complete machine he'd spent a year building, the one with no clean exit, came apart in a single hour the way machines do when you pull one bolt, because it turned out the whole thing had rested on one assumption: that the analyst who read screens would never be brave enough or dangerous enough to walk into the dark and turn on the lights. Standing in the cold outside the outbuilding while the federal agents worked, Whitmore came and stood beside her, a bandage now at his temple, and for a long moment neither of them said anything. You had the recording running the whole time, he finally said, from the car. From before the car, sir. From the second Walker told me where Kane's contingency site was. I called Maya and I never hung up. Everything Kane said tonight, he said to an open line. You walked into an armed building with a gun you didn't intend to use. The gun was for their eyes, sir. The phone was for the case. She almost smiled. You spend enough years being underestimated, you learn to make it a weapon. Kane spent all day telling everyone I was just an analyst. So I let him keep believing it right up until it was the last mistake he made. Whitmore was quiet again. Then, this morning I threw your file on the floor. I called you a name I'm ashamed of. And you stood there and took it, and then you saved a team, and then you saved me. He shook his head slowly. I've been wrong about a lot of things in 34 years. But I don't think I've ever been as wrong about a person as I was about you at 9 o'clock this morning. And Olivia Hayes, who had told him that morning to save his apology until the men were home, looked at the general and understood that something in the world had shifted quietly, permanently, in the space of a single day. The men on the ridge, sir, she said. Iron Shield. It's still on hold. Kane's in cuffs, but that team is still out there, and now we know the corridor was compromised, and we know how, and we know by whom. We can build them a real route now, a clean one, one nobody sold. We'll build it tonight, Whitmore said. You and me, in my war room, and Hayes. He turned to her. This time when you talk, the whole room listens. I'll see to that personally. It was 9:14 in the evening. Ethan Walker sat in the back of a federal car, alive a witness and not a wreck already telling two agents everything he knew. Maya stood by her gray Honda with the tablet full of evidence that had lived because they'd split up, because Olivia had made sure the truth would survive, even if she didn't. Victor Kane sat in handcuffs watching the machine he'd built collapse, learning in real time the one thing he'd never accounted for, that the most dangerous person in any room is the one everybody has already decided to ignore. And a folder that had sat locked in a drawer for 6 years, the 48 hours behind enemy lines, the version of Olivia Hayes she'd buried because of what it cost her, had come out into the dark for one night, done what only it could do, and brought everyone home alive. She hadn't needed to open it in front of the room after all. She just needed to become it one more time. They built the road that night exactly as Whitmore had promised, in the same war room where 12 hours earlier he'd thrown her folder on the floor. It was 11:40 when Olivia walked back into that room, and this time nobody laughed. Word travels fast on a military base, and by midnight, everyone who mattered had heard some version of it. The analyst, nobody respected, the general pulled into the woods, the contractor in federal handcuffs. The same officers who chuckled that morning now stood a little straighter when she entered. Colonel Briggs, the fist-faced man who'd laughed the loudest, actually pulled her chair out for her and couldn't quite meet her eyes when he did it. Olivia didn't gloat. She'd learned a long time ago that the moment you start collecting the respect people owe you is the moment you stop deserving it. She just sat down, pulled up the satellite feeds, and got to work, because there were still men on a ridge on the other side of the world who did not care one bit about the drama at Fort Liberty, who only cared whether the people in this cold room could get them home. Here, she said, and her voice carried now in a way it hadn't that morning, because the room had decided to let it. The corridor Kane's people steered us toward runs through the eastern ridge. That's the kill box. But there's a second approach here along the river valley to the south. It's longer. It's harder on the aircraft. Nobody wanted it in the original planning because it added 40 minutes and burned more fuel. She looked up at Whitmore. But nobody sold it to the enemy either. It's clean, sir. It's the one route nobody was ever told about because nobody ever wanted it. Whitmore studied the map for a long moment. 40 extra minutes over hostile terrain. 40 minutes through country nobody's watching, sir, versus 4 minutes through a box they built to kill everyone who walks in. I'll take the 40. The general looked around the room at the colonels and the majors at the staff, who'd spent the day certain they knew more than the youngest person present. Anybody disagree with the lieutenant? Nobody disagreed with the lieutenant. It was 2:15 in the morning when the revised Operation Iron Shield went forward, and Olivia Hayes did not go home. She sat in that war room through the whole thing, headset on, eyes locked on the feeds, reading the dark on the other side of the planet, the way she'd read it all week, watching the extraction team move down the river valley, watching the eastern ridge where the trap sat waiting for men who would never come. At 3:52 in the morning, a voice came over the net, thin and crackling across 9,000 miles. Command, this is Reaper Actual. We have the package. All personnel accounted for. Repeat, all personnel accounted for. We are moving to exfil. The war room full of hardened officers who'd seen everything went absolutely silent for one held breath. And then it exhaled all at once, a room full of soldiers letting go of something they'd been carrying for a week, and somebody clapped. And then everybody did, and General James Whitmore closed his eyes and put his hand flat on the table and just breathed. Olivia didn't clap. She sat very still with the headset on and listened to the sound of men she would never meet moving safely through the dark toward home, and she felt something come loose in her chest that had been clenched tight for 6 years. Because there had been another mission once, another set of men in the dark, and not all of them had come home. Tonight the number was 0. That's your work, Lieutenant, Whitmore said quietly, coming to stand beside her chair. That's a lot of people's work, sir, Olivia said. Maya, even Walker at the end, but, she pulled off the headset. Yeah, tonight the number's 0. I'll take it. It was 4:03 when she finally walked out, and Maya was waiting in the hallway, 2 cups of coffee, the same as that morning a lifetime ago. They're home, Maya said. It wasn't a question. They're home. For a moment, the 2 women just stood there in the empty hallway of a sleeping base. Then Maya said, you want to know the part that's going to bother me forever if Whitmore had listened this morning. If he'd just read the folder the first time, none of the rest happens. He almost got everybody killed because he couldn't stand to be taught something by a lieutenant, Olivia said. And then he picked the folder up. Not many men can do the second part. She thought that was the end of it. She was wrong. Because 3 days later, when the federal investigation into Blackstone Tactical Solutions was still fresh, and the whole thing looked from the outside like a story that had already found its ending, a woman Olivia had never met walked into Fort Liberty and asked to see her by name. The woman's name was Diane Reyes, and she was a federal prosecutor out of the Justice Department, sharp-suited, tired-eyed, carrying a briefcase, and a look Olivia recognized instantly because it was the same look Olivia wore when she'd found a pattern in the data that everybody else had missed and nobody was going to like. Lieutenant Hayes, Reyes said, sitting down across from her in a secure conference room, I'm going to be building the case against Victor Kane. And before I do, I need to tell you something, and I need to watch your face when I do because I have to know whether you already knew. Knew what? Olivia said. Reyes opened the briefcase. She slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a corporate filing dense with legal language, and Olivia scanned it the way she scanned everything fast. And then she got to the list of names near the bottom, the officers and advisors of Blackstone Tactical Solutions from 4 years back, and her eyes stopped on one of them and her whole body went cold. Because they're listed as a strategic consultant to Victor Kane's company 4 years ago before any of this, before Iron Shield, before the War Room was a name she knew better than almost any other name in her life. It was the name of the commanding officer from the mission 6 years ago, the 48 hours behind enemy lines. The man who'd been in charge the night Olivia had saved the unit and lost the ones she couldn't save. The man who'd written the reports that got classified. The man who'd signed the paperwork that buried her name and erased her from the record. Colonel now retired General Aaron Voss. You're telling me, Olivia said, and her voice came out very quiet, that the man who buried my file 6 years ago went to work for Victor Kane. I'm telling you, Reyes said, watching her carefully, that I need to understand the connection. Because when I started pulling Kane's history, your name came up twice. Once 3 days ago when you took him down, and once 6 years ago in a classified after-action report that Aaron Voss personally sealed. And I don't believe in coincidences that big, Lieutenant. So I have to ask you straight. What happened 6 years ago, and how much of it did Victor Kane already know? And this was the moment, the twist that Olivia had never seen coming, the one that had been sitting under the entire story the whole time. Because she'd spent 6 years believing her old file was buried to protect the classified mission. She'd believed it was just secrecy, just the machinery of a military that hit its hardest nights. She'd believed the version of events she'd been handed. But now sitting across from a federal prosecutor with a corporate filing between them, a new and terrible shape rose out of the data, the way the kill box had risen out of 3 nights of satellite feeds. What if her file hadn't been buried to protect the mission? What if it had been buried to protect Aaron Voss? Ms. Reyes, Olivia said slowly, I need you to tell me exactly what's in the report Voss sealed, the one with my name in it, because I lived that night and I wrote my own account, and if his version and my version don't match, then I've been misunderstanding my own history for 6 years. Reyes hesitated. It's classified above what I can share in this room. Then unclassify it, Olivia said, because I think General Aaron Voss lied about what happened that night. And I think Victor Kane found out. And I think that's why Kane read my file so easily, why he knew about the psych evals, why he was so sure he could make me look crazy. Because he didn't dig my past out of some hard-to-reach vault, Miss Reyes. Somebody handed it to him. Somebody who'd had it in his back pocket for 6 years. Somebody who knew exactly which parts to twist because he was the one who'd written the twist in the first place. The room was silent. Diane Reyes looked at the young lieutenant across the table with an expression that had gone from careful to something close to alarm because she was a prosecutor who'd built a career on reading when a witness was guessing and when a witness was right and Olivia Hayes was not guessing. 6 years ago, Olivia said, and for the first time in the entire story, she spoke about the folder out loud to another human being. There were 14 men behind enemy lines. Command lost contact. I was the analyst on the desk, and I had the only clear picture of the battlefield. And I made a call. I coordinated the rescue myself direct to the ground over the heads of the officers who'd frozen. 12 men came home. 2 didn't. Her voice was steady, but it cost her something to keep it there. The two who didn't die because Colonel Voss, who was running command that night, refused to authorize a second aircraft when I told him the first extraction point was compromised. He froze. He second-guessed the analyst. He wanted to wait for confirmation. And by the time he moved, it was too late for two of them. Reyes said nothing. I put all of that in my account, Olivia went on. Every word, the frozen command, the refused aircraft, the two men we lost because a colonel wouldn't listen to a warning from someone he'd already decided didn't matter. She looked up, and then the whole thing got classified. My name got scrubbed, my account got sealed, and I was told it was to protect the mission. I believed that, Ms. Reyes. For 6 years, I believed my silence was patriotism. I thought I was protecting soldiers. Her jaw tightened. But I wasn't, was I? I was protecting the reputation of the man who let two of them die. Aaron Voss sealed my file because my file was the only thing that told the truth about what he did that night, and he's been sitting on it ever since, waiting for the day it might be useful. And then, Reyes said slowly, finally following her all the way down, he went to work for Victor Kane. And then he went to work for Victor Kane, Olivia said. And when Kane needed to destroy the analyst who caught his trap, Voss reached into his back pocket and handed him a 6-year-old file preloaded with exactly the story they needed. The unstable officer, the one with the tragic mission and the psych evals. Except the psych evals, Miss Reyes. She leaned forward. I want you to pull those too, because I bet you money they were ordered by Aaron Voss after the mission, when I wouldn't stop pushing for an inquiry into why we lost 2 men. You want to make a whistleblower go away? You don't argue with her. You send her to a psychiatrist. You build a paper trail that says she's obsessive, that she's traumatized, that she can't let go of the mission. And then 6 years later, you hand that paper trail to a man like Kane and you say, here, this is how you discredit her. Diane Reyes sat back in her chair, and for a long moment she looked at Olivia Hayes with something that had moved past alarm into a kind of grim respect. You realize what you're describing, Reyes said. You're not describing one corrupt contractor anymore. You're describing a conspiracy that goes back 6 years and includes a sitting retired general. You're describing the man who framed you being the same man who tried to kill your career this week. And if you're right, if any of this is true, then this case just got a great deal bigger than Victor Kane. I know, Olivia said, and I have to ask you the hard question, Lieutenant, because I'd be a bad prosecutor if I didn't. Reyes folded her hands. You've got every reason in the world to want Aaron Voss destroyed. He buried your career. He may have covered up the deaths of 2 soldiers you tried to save. A jury is going to hear that, and a defense attorney is going to stand up and say that Lieutenant Hayes has spent 6 years wanting revenge on this man, and now she's finally got her chance. And she's building a story to get it. So I need to know, are you telling me the truth because it's the truth, or because you want him to burn? And Olivia Hayes, who had spent an entire day refusing to raise her voice, refusing to trade on her past, refusing to make anyone respect her, looked the federal prosecutor dead in the eye and gave her the truest answer she had. Both, she said. Reyes blinked. I do want him to burn, Olivia said. I've wanted it for 6 years. I go to sleep some nights and I see the 2 men we couldn't reach. And I think about a colonel sitting in a command center refusing to authorize an aircraft because a woman told him something he didn't want to hear. And yes, Miss Reyes, I want that man to answer for it. I'm not going to lie to you and tell you I'm above that. I'm not. She let it sit. But wanting it and it being true are 2 different things, and I've spent my whole career keeping them separate. So don't take my word for it. That's the whole point. That's been the whole point from the beginning. Don't look at me, look at the evidence. Pull the file. Pull the psych orders. Pull Voss's consulting contract with Blackstone. Pull the dates and lay them next to each other and see if the pattern's there. If I'm wrong, the data will say I'm wrong, and you should walk out of here and never call me again. But if I'm right, she tapped the table once. Then the data will say that too, and it won't care how much I wanted it. For a long time, Diane Reyes didn't move. Then slowly she reached into her briefcase and pulled out a second folder, thicker than the first, and set it on the table. I already pulled the dates, she said quietly. Before I came here, I pulled Voss's Blackstone contract and I pulled the classification order on your file, and I laid them next to each other. She opened the folder. The order to seal your account was signed by Aaron Voss on a Tuesday. Voss's first consulting payment from Blackstone Tactical Solutions cleared the following Monday. 6 days apart, 6 years ago. She looked up. I came here to find out whether you knew. But I think, Lieutenant, I came here because I already believed you and I needed to look you in the eye and be sure I wasn't being played. She closed the folder. I'm sure now. You're not building a story. You're the only person who's been telling the truth about this from the very beginning. And it's cost you 6 years. Olivia looked at the folder on the table, the thick one, the one full of dates that finally lined up into the shape she'd never let herself see. So what happens now, she said. Now, Reyes said, standing, gathering her things, I go build the biggest case of my career. Victor Kane for the extraction plot, Aaron Voss for the original cover-up, and for feeding Kane the file. And along the way, Lieutenant, whether you want it or not, your account of what happened 6 years ago is going to be unsealed. Because I can't prosecute the cover-up without exposing what was covered up. Which means the whole world is finally going to want to find out what you did behind enemy lines and what it told and who really failed those 2 men that night. She paused at the door. You've spent 6 years refusing to open that file. I'm sorry, but I'm about to open it for you in a federal courtroom in front of everyone. And Olivia Hayes sat alone in the secure conference room after Reyes left, and she thought about that, the things she'd fought against for 6 years, the things she'd refused even when Whitmore begged her the exposure of the one file she'd sworn to keep buried. She'd always believed that opening it would make her into the officer who traded on Old Glory. She saw now that she'd been protecting the wrong thing. She hadn't been protecting her own humility. She'd been protecting Aaron Voss. Her silence, the silence she'd worn like a virtue for 6 years, had been exactly the thing that let the man who failed those 2 soldiers walk free and rise to general and go to work for a war profiteer and reach back into her past to try to destroy her. Her silence hadn't been strength. Sometimes silence is just the shape a cover-up takes when it's wrapped around a good person. The trial of Victor Kane and Aaron Voss ran for the better part of a year, and it was, the newspapers would say, one of the most consequential military corruption cases in a generation. The recording did most of the work on Kane, 11 minutes of a man explaining his own machine. But it was Olivia's testimony that broke Voss, because when the unsealed account finally came into the light, when a courtroom heard the real story of the 48 hours, the frozen command, the refused aircraft, the 2 men lost because a colonel wouldn't listen to a warning from someone he'd decided didn't matter. There was no defense attorney alive who could make it sound like anything but what it was. Aaron Voss took the stand once and tried to explain and made the exact mistake that men like him always make. He tried to make it about his rank. He talked about his decades of experience, his command authority, the impossible pressure of that night, the impertinence of an analyst who thought she knew better than a colonel. And Diane Reyes let him talk. She let him say all of it the way Olivia had once let Whitmore laugh for 40 minutes. And then she asked him one question. General Voss, on the night in question, Lieutenant Hayes, then a junior analyst, told you the first extraction point was compromised and asked you to authorize a second aircraft. Yes or no? Was she right? And Aaron Voss, under oath in front of everyone, could not say no, because the 2 flag-draped coffins had already answered the question 6 years before he ever took the stand. She was right, he finally said. Louder, General, for the record. She was right, Voss said, and it was over. Both men went to prison. Kane for the extraction plot and the attempted murder of a general. Voss for the cover-up, the falsified psychological records, the sale of a classified account to a private contractor. The 2 soldiers lost 6 years earlier were finally acknowledged. Their families finally told the truth of how they died and who had failed them. And if that was cold comfort, it was at least at last the truth. And the truth was the one thing those families had been denied longer than anyone. And Olivia Hayes, whose account had been sealed for 6 years to protect a guilty man, finally had her name in the record. Not because she'd wanted the recognition, because the truth couldn't be told without it. The medals came after that, the ones they'd never let her wear. The Army, cornered by its own courtroom, had no choice but to acknowledge what she'd done behind enemy lines. And there was a ceremony, and General James Whitmore himself pinned them on, and afterward he stood beside her the way he had at 4 a.m. in the war room. You spent 6 years telling me you'd never open that file, he said. That the day you needed people to know what you did was the day you'd lost the thing you cared about. And now the whole world knows. The world knows because a prosecutor needed it to convict a guilty man, Olivia said. Not because I traded on it. There's a difference, sir. I never opened that file to make anyone respect me. I opened it because keeping it shut was protecting the wrong person. She looked at the medals unfamiliar and heavy on her chest. I was wrong about one thing all those years. I thought silence was humility. But silence isn't always humility, sir. Sometimes silence is just fear wearing humility's uniform. And the man who taught me that lesson is going to prison for it. Whitmore was quiet a moment. You know what the biggest failure of my career was? A Tuesday morning in a war room, Olivia said. A Tuesday morning in a war room, he agreed. I spent 34 years believing authority came from rank, from the stars on your shoulder. It took a lieutenant I called sweetheart on the worst and best day of my life to teach me that authority comes from being right and having the courage to say so when nobody in the room wants to hear it. He turned to her. You changed this place, you know. Not with the medals, before the medals, just by standing there and not sitting down. He was right about that. The story got out the way true stories do, and the culture of the place shifted slowly, permanently. Young officers who'd learned to keep their heads down started to understand something they hadn't before, that the person with the lowest rank in the room might be carrying the most important truth in the building. That courage wasn't about being the loudest. That the voice everyone was trained to ignore was sometimes the exact voice that needed to be heard. Junior officers started speaking up in briefings, not recklessly, not to show off, but when they saw something, when they knew something, they learned to put it on the table because they'd heard about a lieutenant who did exactly that against a room full of generals and turned out to be right and paid for it with 6 years of silence and had been right the whole time anyway. Months later, Olivia stood in front of a new class of intelligence officers. Young ones, green ones, some of them certain she couldn't teach them anything, some of them just waiting to be underestimated themselves. She didn't tell them about Kane. She didn't tell them about the woods, or the gun, or the 6-year cover-up, or the 2 men she'd never stop seeing when she closed her eyes. She told them one thing. You're going to spend a lot of your careers being the youngest person in the room, she said, the one nobody expects to know anything. And you're going to be tempted when you see something the senior people miss to stay quiet, to tell yourself it's not your place, that someone with more experience must have already thought of it. She let it sit. I'm here to tell you the cost of you being wrong is a little embarrassment, and the cost of you staying silent when you were right, when you saw the thing nobody else saw, can be measured in lives. I know that price, I paid it. And worse, I watched 2 men pay it because a room decided a junior officer didn't matter. The room was very quiet. Nobody was chuckling now. They're not going to listen to you because of your rank. You don't have any yet. They're not going to listen to you because of who you are. They don't know who you are. So you give them the one thing they can't argue with. You give them the evidence. You put the truth on the table and you make it so clean, so undeniable, that the person you're handing it to has to look at what you're showing them before they can look at you. She looked at their young faces one by one. Say it with me, because you're going to need it someday in a room full of people who've already decided you don't matter. And a room full of green lieutenants said it back to her. Look at the evidence before you look at the person presenting it. Again, Olivia said. They said it again stronger. And somewhere in the back of that room, a young woman who reminded Olivia of no one so much as herself 6 years ago sat up a little straighter and wrote it down and underlined it twice. Olivia Hayes served for many more years. She was passed over, sometimes doubted, sometimes underestimated more times than she could count. And every single time she answered it the same way. Not with her history, not with her medals, but with the work in front of her, clean and undeniable, put on the table for anyone with the courage to actually look. Because she had learned the truth of it the hardest way a person can, that a general's stars can hide a coward, that a sealed file can protect the guilty and bury the brave in the same stroke. That silence is not always a virtue, and that the person with the lowest rank in the room can carry the most important truth in the building if only she has the courage to set it on the table and refuse to pick it back up. The voice everyone is trained to ignore is sometimes the only voice that can save them. A soldier is not measured by the stars on her shoulder, or the medals in a folder, or the respect she is owed. A soldier is measured by what she does when the whole room is laughing and the truth is still the truth, and she is the only one willing to stand up and say it. Olivia Hayes stood up. She stayed standing for 6 years of silence and 1 long day of fire. And because she did the guilty, answered the truth, came home, and so did every soldier she swore to bring back.